Hey everybody, this is Rob Keynes with the Freedom Report. I'm here with a returning guest that you know, John Adams from Adams Economics, here to discuss something new that we've never talked about, a new scandal in Australia. John, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Rob. How are you?
Doing very well. You guys will remember John being involved in the Perth Mint investigation and over the scandal that Daniel and I covered, and he took up the cause over the last few years. John, you've been busy investigating lots of different scandals, I suppose, in Australia, having to do, this one has to do with some elites and a radio broadcast from 1975. I'm just going to let you introduce it and go through. I guess the first question I want to ask is, this is a scandal around pedophilia. Can you tell me how you came upon the tape and what exactly it was, and just kind of give us an idea it really just kind of give us an idea of what happened and how you
Sure,
came upon it.
sure. Okay, so here's how the story starts, Rob. 10 years ago, in 2015, there was a newspaper column in one of our major publications called the Australian Newspaper by a guy called Gerald Henderson, and he
Mhm.
wrote about this 1975 radio interview about pedestry. And basically, he was calling out to say that the national broadcaster, so the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, which was in the US would be the equivalent of PBS, basically did a radio interview promoting pedophilia back in 1975. So that's the first time I came across this whole idea of this recording and a tape.
Mhm.
And that was a really interesting article. And before that time, I never knew anything about this. And I was born in 1981, so 1975 was even before I was born. So um, it always that tape that story always stuck in the back of my mind.
Mhm.
And just in 2023, I just decided, well, I'm just going to go see if I can get the tape. So I did a I did a FOIA request or freedom of information request of the ABC, and I said there's an article that refers to a recording from 1975. Do you have it? And if you do, I want it. So they said they redirected me to the archives department at the ABC, and a woman there says she went through the catalog and said we do have it. So I said, well, okay, so how do I get it? So they said sign a form, a legal document, which is what they call a personal use release form, which basically says that I agree that the recording is for personal use in a private setting, and I'm not to broadcast it, I'm not to share it, I'm not to use it for any commercial use or non-commercial use. It's just for me and my own private home, and that's the only thing I can really do with the recording. So had to sign a form, had to pay some money, and then I got the tape. And to be honest, Rob, I didn't know what this tape was really about. I didn't understand the significance of it. All I know is there was a recording, and I asked for it, and they gave it to me. So, and then when I heard it, I couldn't believe what I heard. I was born in Australia. I'm 44 years old, so I've been around, for 4 decades. I've never heard anything like this in my life. And so when I heard it for the first time, I thought to myself, well, I mean, there's something very unique about this recording where they're basically promoting pedophilia so there was a host called Richard Neville who died in 2016. He was the radio host. He was a pedophile himself. And there was three pedophiles and a teenager that was basically on the recording talking about what they do, how they do it, why they do it. And this was, basically financed by taxpayers, promoted on the public airwaves in 1975. And so at some point, I knew that I was going to reveal this to the public, but I was waiting for the right time. So the last few years, I've been working on white collar crime sort of issues, ASIC related issues, and we did I think an interview last year, Rob, where I talked about the Australian Securities Investments Commission. There was a parliamentary inquiry that I was able to trigger around that, and then a couple of investigations into a bullion dealership called ABC Bullion. So that's what I've been focusing on, and so my co-host and I on our YouTube channel, in the interest of the people, we were off air for about 11 months, and then we've come back recently for our new season, and this new season is all focused on corruption. So I wanted to sort of start off with a bit of a bang, and so about a month ago we started off with our first program, which was Australia's secret pedophile tape. And we talked about this recording and how I couldn't release it, etc. So we introduced the concept to our audience then, And now, before we did the first recording, I did go to the lawyers at the ABC and I said, "Well, I've signed this document with these liquid conditions. Would you be prepared to release me from these conditions so I can share parts of the recording with the public, because the public have no idea what happened in 1975?" And they basically said, "No, they don't give me permission." So then we encouraged our audience to write to the federal minister, who has the power under federal law to tell the ABC to publish material on its digital platforms if it's in the public interest. The minister basically said that they were not prepared to intervene. So basically, on the 12th of August, I made a public statement to say that that we were going to go ahead with publication, even though I signed a legal document that I basically wouldn't do it. And then on the following day, on the 13th of October, basically we published the tape on YouTube. Now, 2 minutes before 5 o'clock, I received a text message on my phone, but also an email from the ABC with a legal threat to say that if I proceed with publication, they would seek injunctive relief in the courts. They'd sue me for damages and costs if I didn't relent. But basically, we didn't stop. So I went up on YouTube for 4.5 hours. We had about 23,000 views. The recording had been removed by YouTube, and then I reposted the video shortly after on X, and it's pinned to my account. So my X account is it's called Adams Economics, so anyone can look it up. And we've had I think about 230,000 views on X. And people have now copied it around the country. People have put it on Rumble and BitChute, Instagram, Facebook, etc.
Hmm.
So all the other platforms are accepting this recording. But now the cat's out of the bag. And obviously, Rob, obviously we have the Epstein situation in the US that's been a very big topic this year. In the UK, there's been a very big scandal at the BBC with a guy called Jimmy Savile, who was the best friend of Prince Charles, who was one of the most notorious pedophiles in British history. So we have this situation in the Western world about promoting pedophilia, protecting pedophilia, and the other a couple of elements that your audience should know is that in the last 10 years, this issue was raised in Parliament. So in 2016, a senator called 𝙁𝙊𝙇𝙇𝙊𝙒, he actually asked the ABC whether they were prepared to apologize for putting this broadcast together and putting it on the radio, and they basically said that they wouldn't apologize for it at all. And then in 2018, there was some further questions, and the ABC said in a formal statement to Parliament, there is no record of the interview. So now, last week, I had the opportunity to speak to Gerald Henderson, who wrote the original column that I learnt about. And he said to me last week that he never had heard the tape. And I was sort of dumbfounded by that. And I said to him, "Well, how come you never went to get the tape from the ABC?" And he said that such was the outcry when this pedophile tape went to air in 1975 that the ABC told the public in 1975 that the tape had been destroyed. So 50 years ago, they said they'd destroy the tape. 2018, they said to Parliament that there is no tape, and yet they've held the tape for 50 years. And it just so happens that John Adams went and got the tape in 2023, and now the public at large have it's now out there on the internet. Everyone has now heard the tape, and I'm not sure, Rob. Obviously, Rob, before we started recording, you said that you've heard 90% of the tape. I'm not sure if you can find an equivalent in the United States where three pedophiles openly talk about pedophilia and why they do it and how they do it. But all I can say is, as a factual matter, there is nothing like this recording in Australian history. There's a very good reason why the ABC wanted to keep this recording secret, because it is just, what they're talking about is criminal misconduct. And obviously, the ABC was promoting crimes and trying to normalize crimes back in 1975. People listening to it in the last week and a half have just been completely horrified that their tax dollars 50 years ago could ever finance, a piece of filth like what happened back in 1975.
Yeah, I was pretty astounded. It is out on your X account. I've reposted it on my feed as well. I listened to it. I couldn't, I turned it off at a point where I just couldn't listen to it anymore. It really started to get really in depth. I don't know if graphic's the right word. I mean, there were some discussions about the acts, but just the way that they talked about this is completely normal. And they talked about it in a way as if they were predatory and that was okay. They were saying, well, and then the host asked, like, how can you get away with this? Why would you do this? And they said, and their excuse disgusted me. It was, well, this already goes on anyway, and somebody's going to do it if we don't. And so that justified, their actions, and they just seemed to not have any sort of care about the effect on, the children that they were involved with. And one other point that was on the tape and that you talked about in one of your videos was that not only were they doing this with young boys, but also, and they would go looking for, young boys where they would be, whether it be school or whatever the case is. But beyond that, that there was a network of pedophiles and that they started meeting these young boys at other pedophiles' houses. So the
Yes.
scope of this went beyond just the three gentlemen on the program. And that's at the point where I was starting to disconnect from it and say, you know what? Because, I had flashbacks to the Epstein stuff, to, the reports of Pizzagate, whether or not that was real or not. But all of that. And, it was just astounding that that made the right, even in 1975. I know that the 70s was a different time. It was much more permissive time, especially sexually. But that particular content to make it on the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, a major radio station, was just astounding. And what's even more astounding, John, is that you were able to get a copy of the tape. I mean, I guess enough time passed, people have forgotten about it. Like when you called them, did you say, "Hey, this is the content of the tape," or did you say, "Hey, I want the episode from this day"? And did they seem to have any idea what they were handing over to you?
Sure. So 2 points that I'll say in response. So to the second point, so when I emailed the ABC, I actually included the link to the Gerald Henderson article. So
Ah,
Henderson in 2015 wrote about the pedophile tape. So I
okay.
basically said, this guy Gerald Henderson in this column talks about a 1975 recording called Pedestry. Do you have a copy of it? And they said yes. So they knew what I was asking for.
Uh,
However, the woman who handed me the recording, dare I say, I don't think they ever heard the recording, because if they actually heard it, maybe they would have had second thoughts about ever showing it to me. So again, maybe with the passage of time, people didn't understand what was on what was on the recording, how significant it was. But again, how did I get it and no one else got it? Maybe that's just luck. But now for and I mean, the other point I always make is kind of like what I said before. Jared Henderson, who knew about the tape, he never went to get it. People in Parliament never went to get the tape because the ABC told Parliament it doesn't exist.
yeah.
So no one had any um, motivation to actually ask the question, "Hey, do you actually have this?" And maybe I'm the first person in Australian history in the last 50 years to go to the ABC point blank and say, "Hey, do you actually have this in your vault, in the archive vault?" And they actually fessed up and said, "Yeah, we do have it." So quite extraordinary about how I got the tape, because people think, well, I mean, that I may have connections or there was some grand strategy behind this. No, I just sent an email and said, "Hey, there's an article here, talks about this recording. Do you have it?" And I said, "Yeah, we got it." So it was a simple story, but there we go. There now, one thing I'll say, Rob, is that in the 1970s, there was an entrenched pedophile network in my state of New South Wales, and it went through Sydney, it went through to the north of the state, and it went to the south of the state. So I live in a place called Wollongong, which is about 90 minutes south of Wollongong, and um, in the 1960s, we had a mayor called Tony Bevan. He's one of the most notorious pedophiles in New South Wales history. He wasn't just a pedophile; he was actually a pimp. And so we had a Royal Commission in the 1990s looking at police corruption. And one of the elements that the Royal Commission looked at was police protecting pedophiles. And so there's a 600-page report that talks about the pedophile network happening in New South Wales, and the role that police actually play to protect these people. And they talk about this guy called Tony Bevan and what he was up to. And the only pedophile they labeled as evil was Tony Bevan. So that was the guy from the 1960s, and then we had this guy from I think 1973 to 1991, a guy called Frank Arkell, and he was also a pedophile, and he was also one of the people interviewed during the in terms of the Royal Commission in the 1990s. So now, one thing I'll say, Rob, is that after we did our first show on YouTube, I had a documentary maker from Sydney contact me who's been looking at this issue and making a documentary over the last 18 months. He said that I needed to meet someone who was from Sydney, and this person came down, and I met this person. And back in the 1970s, this person was actually he was taken from his home by the government. He was placed into foster care, and then he was basically pimped out into this pedophile network. And this was a massive problem in the 1970s, where children from dysfunctional homes were basically taken from were taken from their parents by the government, and obviously the whole and very similar system in the United States about putting children in a better environment for their upbringing. But in the 1970s, a number of these people were actually pushed into these pedophile networks, and this has been a major scandal. And so this man that I met a few weeks ago, he was basically a boy prostitute in the 1970s, and he operated in Sydney, he operated in my town of Wollongong, so he has first-hand experience of what he did, what he was forced to do, and then obviously all the other people that were involved in. And so he came from a part of Sydney where there was about 50 boys who were in state care that were pushed into this network. And he basically said that every single person except for him is basically dead, either from suicide or drugs or mental health issues. But the trauma of the pedophilia basically killed 49 out of 50 men. And there's only one man standing. And I just had the opportunity to speak to that person about 3 to 4 weeks ago. And it was just a very extraordinary sort of first-hand account of, you can talk about this issue of pedophilia, you can listen to the tape, and then you can actually talk to one of the last remaining survivors who actually was forced to do these sexual acts, and he's still alive to be able to tell the story of what actually happened during that period of time. The one other thing that is probably significant for an American audience, Rob, is that in 2015 there was a senator in the federal parliament called Bill Heffernan. He made a very famous speech about elite judges, politicians, and lawyers being pedophiles and being protected for the last 30, 40 years. And he actually had a police document which he says that had 28 names on a list, including a former Australian Prime Minister, and these were all alleged pedophiles. So ever since that speech in 2015, this issue of the 28 people on a list it's been a very big issue in Australia on social media, because the establishment don't want to talk about it, and obviously one of the excuses that they keep on saying is that there's no evidence to prove that anyone of the 28 names on the list are actually pedophiles. So that's why the so that's why the list continues to sort of be talked about in terms of social media, but the official media and in terms of the official government, that ever since that speech, they've done nothing. They've done no work in relation to that list and the 28 names. Having said that, in this instance, there is no conspiracy theory. There is no lack of evidence. We have people who admit they're pedophiles, who basically say on the record what they did, how they did it, why they did it. And there's no dispute that in 1975, our national broadcaster was promoting pedophilia, and they tried to cover up the fact for 50 years, including lying to Parliament, saying that the tape doesn't exist. And obviously the other important thing is, in 50 years, they refused to apologize for the recording. And obviously I was the closest person to get to the heart of the story. And then 2 minutes before I basically was going to reveal the horror to the Australian people, they basically said they were going to take me to court and financially destroy me. So once you really push against elite power, whether it's in the United States or Australia, they'll use any tactic that they can to try to stop you. Now, having said that, the tape's been out there. It's been over a week and a half. I have not heard anything from the ABC or their law or their legal team. So litigation may come, and if it does, we'll handle that. Like I'll be able to handle that. And whatever the legal action is. But now last week, we actually had quite a bit of mainstream media coverage. So Daily Mail Australia and a few other publications covered the in terms of the whole saga of how I got the tape and publishing it and the legal threats, etc. So it's caused a massive stir both in parts of the mainstream media as well as the social alternative media. Now, if they did commence legal proceedings against me, it would blow up the story to even a much more monumental level, and they'll have to explain to the court, um, why do they keep the secret in terms of 50 years, and obviously why is enforcing their copyright in this instance so paramount to the ABC. So a lot of people think that this is the end of the story for the ABC. They're not going to want to justify their actions. They're not going to want to amplify the story and give me a bigger platform to call out their corruption. But I mean, look, again, they put a gun to my head, and I said, "You're bluffing," and I went forward, and so far so good.
Well, it's almost like a hot potato they really don't want to touch. I would imagine if they took you to court through if Discovery's anything, if Discovery's anything in Australia like it is in the US, there's going to be more to come from that. So they may want to stay away from it from for that reason. Plus, it's already out. So how are they going to deny it, right? And so I think the fact that you put it out there really was the important thing. And I'm hoping that they don't proceed with any sort of legal action against you. I think it'd be foolish. I think it'd make the issue much worse, because you're going to be able to come back on social media probably through any public documents, and that's the tricky thing about legal proceedings. One of the reasons, John, that I reached out to you to cover this story, I want to give a little story of my own. As you know, my daughter was an actress for many years. She was a model and an actress from the age 3 to age 21. So about was that 19, 18, 19 years. She got into acting about the last 5 to 6 years. She was on many shows. One of the first shows she was on was an independent film that we're filming up in Oklahoma. And she was there. It was her and a boy that were sort of the main protagonists. It was a kid's film. And, in the entire time we were in acting, I never saw anything directly in any of the sets or any of the groups that we worked with. And we worked with all the main TV production companies and some independent film companies. I never saw anything directly offensive. And I was the travel parent. So as her dad, when she was underage, I traveled with her. I didn't see anything directly to her, but there was one incident on the very first film that she was on. We were out filming in Oklahoma, and the mother of the boy who was 15 years old, who was, they were filming together, came to me. We were in the back room while they were filming. We were at like a studio at a technical college there in Oklahoma. And she came to me and said, I've got an offer it's a mainstream cable channel. And the cable channel is notorious for putting out things like soft porn or that type, late night viewing, kind of what you can get away with on a pay channel like that, not a pub, not the main channels, the main network channels. But this really astounded me. She came to me and said, well, I've got an offer from this company to get my son on their channel. And keep in mind, he's 15. And I said, oh, great. What is it? And she said, well, I'm not sure if I should do it. And she said, they want him to masturbate as a 15-year-old, and they were going to film the entire thing and put it on cable TV. And I was like, wait a minute, he's underage. Is that even legal? And she said, I think so. I mean, their lawyer said it was. And she says, do you think I should do it? And I looked at her and said, well, first, are you Christian? She said, yes. And I said, okay, that's maybe the first reason you don't want to do it. But I said, your son's 15. He's not at the age where he has his full cognitive thinking ability about what the rest of his life is going to be like. As his parent, do you want him masturbating in the full on television, have to grow up with that, and then deal with that the rest of his life? Because it's going to make him famous, but maybe not in the way that he wants to be. So I think,
Exactly.
John, that it's endemic in the film industry as well. You hear the stories from Corey Haim and all those people that were abused, um, sexually abused, sodomy, that type of thing. But I just thought, that's really disgusting that somebody would want to film a 15-year-old in the act of that and put it on major cable television for millions of people to see. And, I've always remembered that story. And after that incident, that was her very first film. After that incident, I watched everybody like a hawk. I was there on set every single day with her. I never left her out of my sight. After she became 18, she did a 13-week stint on a soap opera called Days of Our Lives, and they wanted her to do bedroom scenes and things. And she got through that 13-week stint and decided to quit acting. That was one of the reasons. There was also others, is that the industry has really been hit hard in recent years. There's not enough money for a lot of actors and actresses and people. So I'm very happy she decided to go back to college. But that whole incident made me very uncomfortable. And, I suspect when it comes to any sort of moneyed interest, moneyed industry, such as politics, film, big business, that there's probably incidences of those types of things. And so, I'm really interested in this coming out because it's a really disgusting practice. I will also say that recently I've been involved in some counseling work for people going through some very tough things in their life, and I've been learning about childhood trauma. And I will tell you that a lot of people have gone through this very privately. Somebody that I was actually dating a while back had been sexually abused and raped and serially abused up and through her adulthood. And so this one kind of struck home with me because I've unfortunately been privy to friends and people in my life that have had this kind of stuff happen in their childhood and have seen what it's done to them as adults. And I can imagine, John, that there are probably millions of children that could tell us stories if they had the voice. And that's why I appreciate you bringing this to the public and making light of this, and in a way that people can see and actually hear what went on in a very real case on a very a national radio show. It's astounding because this is something that we all need to be aware of. I think it happens way more than we hear in the news. And so I just appreciate you having the courage to do that. And I appreciate you getting out there and putting the message out and agreeing to come on the program and talk about it.
Sure, sure. Now, one question, Rob, is because you didn't actually end the story. So, did the boy actually do the scene, or did his mother actually have the sense not to do the scene?
Well, I basically told her, I said, and I've never told this story to anybody, so I think it's been years and it'll be okay. Nobody's going to know who it is. I basically told her, I said, as a parent, I would, as a Christian woman, I would think that you would not do that. I said, if that's the cost for your son to reach some level of fame, then maybe you need to re-examine, his potential career choices. And I basically put it on her that I'm not her husband, but her husband wasn't there. So I was really acting in the role of the male in this instance because she was coming to ask me as a male, what do you think about this? Because it was her son. And I said, don't do it. I said, you know what? It's not going to be worth it. Think about him growing up and never being able to take that, never be able to get rid of it. It's in the public. It's
Yeah,
not something you
yeah.
do in the privacy of your own home, which is bad enough. It's something that millions of people are going to see, and it's always going to follow him around. And, being 15 years old, I imagine a lot of these boys, they don't really understand what's going on. They're having these situations with these adults that they trust who are abusing that trust relationship with them. And I understand completely when you said that 49 of the 50 people, had passed away, and a lot of them had really tough circumstances. I can imagine the amount of damage it would do to a psyche of a young person, then growing up and having to live with it and live it, every day of your life. I'm sure you're thinking about what happened. It's a horrible, horrible practice, and it's something that we really need to talk more about as a society and put a stop to it. So, like I said, we got about 2 minutes left, or we're going to get cut off. But I just wanted to thank you for doing this, John. As this investigation goes forward, or if anything else happens, I'd love for you to come back on the program and talk about it if you would.
Sure.
And real quickly, before we run out of time, if you would just give where people can find your social media and where people can find, if they want to listen to it, this radio broadcast.
Sure. Yeah. So if people want to listen to the broadcast from 1975, go into X and look up Adam's Economics, and it's the top tweet pinned to my account. And now, in terms of some of the other programming that I do, you can go to a YouTube channel called In the Interest of the People, and we've been broadcasting since 2019 about all sorts of topics. But our season at the moment is all about corruption.
Thank you so much, John, for joining the program. Sorry this one was short, but like I said, you're welcome back on the program to go through this. And I know that you're also doing other investigations. You're always welcome on the program for those. Appreciate you very much. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.